At Thanksgiving, my mom said. Your sister bought a stunning house. When are you going to settle down? I responded. I already did. I just didn't invite people who doubted me. Her face turned red as everyone looked over. My older brother was basically the blueprint my mom always dreamed of. He was a varsity athlete, team captain, prom king, and by 23 he was married to a pharmaceutical sales rep named Tyler, a guy who lived in polo shirts and drove a leased BMW like it was part of the uniform. They had a golden retriever called Scout and a 4-bedroom colonial in a neighborhood where every lawn got mowed early Saturday morning like clockwork. He was 32 now, almost 9 years deep into a marriage that looked flawless from the outside. I was the odd one out, the guy who spent weekends wandering through art galleries instead of hitting brunch spots, the one who studied architecture instead of something my family considered sensible like nursing or teaching. My mom never could wrap her head around why I couldn't just be more like Ethan. Every family get-together turned into a quiet comparison, a constant reminder that I wasn't measuring up to some standard I never signed up for. Thanksgiving 2023 kicked off the same way every holiday always did. Ethan's Mercedes SUV was parked in the driveway, shining like it had been detailed for the occasion, lined up perfectly as if even his car needed to show off. I grabbed the pumpkin pie I'd picked up from a local bakery and went inside. Hey Mark, you made it, my dad Thomas said, and he was the only one who sounded genuinely happy to see me. He pulled me into a tight hug, and I caught the familiar mix of his Old Spice cologne and turkey roasting in the kitchen. Wouldn't miss it, Dad, I said. Your brother's in the living room, he added. He's got some big news. The way he said it made it clear he'd already heard the whole thing more than once. I walked in and found Ethan sitting on the sectional sofa, one arm wrapped around Tyler, his perfectly styled hair catching the glow from the crystal chandelier my mom insisted on keeping lit year-round. Tyler sat beside him, nodding along like one of those dashboard bobbleheads. Aunt Linda, Uncle Frank, and my grandmother were positioned around them like they were watching a show. Mark, Ethan squealed, using the childhood nickname I'd asked him to drop years ago. You have to see the pictures. He shoved his phone toward my face before I even had a chance to put the pie down. Swipe after swipe showed a massive house with white columns and a circular driveway, the kind of place that blended seamlessly with every other house on his street, which I assumed was the whole appeal. 5 bedrooms, 3.5 baths, and a kitchen with marble countertops, he announced proudly. We close next month. It's beautiful, sweetheart, my mom said as she came in from the kitchen, drying her hands on a towel stitched with autumn leaves. She kissed Ethan's cheek, then looked at me with that familiar expression I'd known my whole life, disappointment layered under concern and topped with judgment. Dinner went exactly how it always did. About 20 minutes of my dad asking everyone about work, followed by hours of my mom somehow redirecting every conversation back to Ethan's achievements. The new house became the main topic. Ethan walked everyone through every room like a guided tour, while Tyler chimed in with comments about mortgage rates and future resale value. I poked at my green beans and counted down the minutes until leaving wouldn't seem rude. Then my mom said what I'd been dreading. Your brother just bought a gorgeous house, she said, gesturing toward Ethan with her wine glass, already on her third pour. When are you finally going to settle down, Mark? The table went dead silent. Even my grandmother stopped chewing. I could feel every pair of eyes on me waiting for my usual excuse. Normally I'd mutter something about focusing on my career or not meeting the right person yet, make myself smaller, and let the conversation drift away. But something inside me finally gave out. Maybe it was the wine I'd been nursing all night. Maybe it was nearly 3 decades of being the disappointing son catching up to me. Or maybe I was just done caring what they thought. I already did settle down, I said, calm and steady. I just didn't invite anyone who doubted me. My mom's face went bright red, the color creeping up from her neck like spilled wine on a white tablecloth. The room felt colder somehow. Ethan dropped his fork with a loud clatter. Excuse me? My mom said, her voice sharp as ice. You heard me, I replied, taking a sip of water and surprising myself with how steady my hands were. I got married 7 months ago. Bought a house too. I just didn't see the point in inviting people who spent my whole life making me feel like I wasn't enough. The explosion I expected didn't happen right away. Instead, everyone just sat there stunned. My dad stared at me like he was seeing me for the first time. Aunt Linda's mouth hung open. Tyler looked like he wanted to melt into the wall. You're lying, Ethan said finally, his voice tight. There's no way you got married without telling anyone. Why would I lie? I asked, pulling out my phone and opening my photo gallery. Here's the courthouse ceremony. That's my wife, Rachel. She's a structural engineer. We got married in April. I handed the phone to my dad. In the picture, I was wearing a simple navy suit, standing next to a woman with warm eyes and dark curly hair. We were on the courthouse steps, both smiling like we just pulled off something incredible. The spring sunlight made everything feel bright and full of possibility. You look happy, my dad said quietly, staring at the photo. And the house? My mom asked, finding her voice again, though it trembled. I swiped to another picture. Our Victorian townhouse in Pittsburgh's Lawrenceville neighborhood filled the screen. 3 stories of red brick with original stained glass windows, and a turret that had completely won me over the first time I saw it. Rachel and I had bought it a year earlier and spent 5 exhausting months renovating it, stripping wallpaper and refinishing hardwood floors until our backs ached and our savings took a serious hit. 3 bedrooms, 2 full baths, original 1890s architecture, I said, even though that last detail wasn't entirely true and was probably closer to 60% accurate, but I wanted to see the look on my mom's face. How did you? She started, then trailed off. I've been working, saving, and living below my means, I said, taking my phone back from my dad, while everyone else assumed I was barely getting by. Rachel and I met 3 years ago at a renovation workshop, and since then we've quietly been putting our life together while everyone else was too busy measuring me against Ethan to even notice what I was building. Why wouldn't you tell us? My grandmother asked, speaking up for the first time, her voice soft and genuinely hurt. And that question hit me differently because she'd never been cruel, just swept along by the family current. I felt myself ease up a bit. Grandma, every time I came home there was always something, I said. My clothes were too artsy. My apartment was too small. My job didn't pay enough. My girlfriends weren't serious enough. I looked around the table and let it sink in. I got tired of defending my life to people who had already decided I was failing at it. We never said you were failing, my mom shot back. You didn't have to say it outright, I replied, lifting my wine glass and then setting it back down untouched. It was in every comparison to Ethan, every well-meaning suggestion about my career, every conversation about when I'd finally get serious about life, like I wasn't already serious, just not in the way you approved of. Ethan stood up suddenly. This is ridiculous. You're acting like we're the bad guys just because you decided to be secretive and dramatic. I wasn't being dramatic, I said, standing too and grabbing my jacket from the back of the chair. I was protecting my happiness. Early on, Rachel asked if we should have a big wedding, invite everyone, do the whole traditional thing, and I told her I wanted our marriage to start with joy, not judgment. So we went to the courthouse with her parents and her sister, and it was perfect. His family was there, my mom said, her voice cracking on the last word. They were excited for us, I answered. They didn't spend the whole time asking when we do something more impressive, or why we couldn't be more like Rachel's successful brother. They were just happy. I headed for the door. That's the difference. My dad followed me into the hallway. Mark, wait. I turned, already feeling the adrenaline wear off and guilt start creeping in. I'm proud of you, he said quietly. I should have said that more. I should have stood up for you more. My throat tightened. Thanks, Dad. Can I meet her? Rachel, I mean, and see the house sometime? Yeah, I said, blinking back tears. I'd like that. He hugged me again, longer this time, and whispered that he was sorry my mom had made me feel like I had to hide the best parts of my life. I drove back to Pittsburgh in a haze and called Rachel from the car to tell her everything. She listened without interrupting, which was one of the 1,000 reasons I loved her. How do you feel? She asked when I finished. Terrified, relieved, guilty, free, all at the same time. Want me to make hot chocolate when you get home? Yes, please. The drive gave me time to replay the night over and over, my mom's face flashing in my mind, the way the color drained and then rushed back. Part of me felt triumphant, and another part felt like I'd set off a bomb in the middle of my family and walked away from the wreckage. Nobody really tells you that standing up for yourself isn't clean or cinematic. It doesn't feel like a movie moment with the perfect comeback and dramatic exit. It feels messy and complicated, like you might be the villain in someone else's story. I thought about all the years that led up to this, all the little cuts that added up. There was my college graduation, where my mom spent lunch talking about Ethan's promotion at the dental office while I just earned my architecture degree with honors and landed a competitive internship in Pittsburgh, And she asked me exactly 2 questions before pivoting back to how great Ethan was at upselling whitening treatments. There was Easter when I brought home my ex, Alex, a sculptor who was thoughtful and kind with calloused hands and paint permanently stuck under his nails, and my mom took one look at him and asked what his real job was, then smiled tightly and said how creative when I explained art was his job, the word dripping with judgment. Alex and I broke up 3 months later for our own reasons, but my family hadn't helped. Then there was my 25th birthday dinner, when Ethan announced his engagement to Tyler, and the night instantly became about the ring, the venue, the color schemes, and nobody even sang happy birthday while my cake sat forgotten on the counter and everyone crowded around Ethan's phone scrolling Pinterest boards. Each moment on its own was survivable, but together they formed a pattern that taught me my accomplishments would always come second to Ethan's more acceptable life choices. When I walked into our house, it was warm string lights glowing in the windows and jazz playing softly from the kitchen, and Rachel wrapped me in a hug that smelled like cinnamon and safety. "You did good," she murmured into my hair. "I might have just blown up my family," I said. "Maybe they needed it," she replied gently. She led me to the couch, handed me a mug of hot chocolate topped with whipped cream and cinnamon exactly the way I liked it, and didn't push me to decide anything or respond to anyone. She just stayed close. "Tell me everything," she said, settling in beside me. "Don't leave anything out." So I did, walking her through the whole night, including how Ethan had been flashing house photos before I'd even taken my coat off, how my mom refilled her wine glass 3 times before dinner, how Aunt Linda commented on my bohemian look when she saw my vintage jacket and chunky jewelry, and then your mom asked the question, Rachel said. She didn't just ask, I replied, taking a sip of hot chocolate. She announced it like she was presenting evidence to a jury, saying your brother just bought a beautiful house. When will you finally settle down? Putting all this weight on finally like I'm 45 and sleeping in my childhood bedroom instead of 28 with a career I actually love. After I told them, Ethan immediately accused me of making the whole thing up, saying there was no way I could have gotten married without telling anyone, and I laughed, but it came out sharp and bitter, like the idea that someone would choose me without his knowledge was somehow offensive to him. Rachel's jaw tightened when I told her that part, because over the 3 years we'd been together she'd heard plenty of stories about my family, but she'd never seen it play out in real time. I'd always kept her separate from them, told myself I was protecting her, though maybe I was really protecting myself too, keeping my happiness sealed off from their ability to poison it. I wish I could have seen their faces when you showed them the photos, she said. Dad looked sad, I told her, not angry, just wounded, like he suddenly realized he'd missed something important. I scratched behind Fitzgerald's ears while I talked. Everyone else looked shocked, almost insulted, like how dare I have a full life they didn't get to supervise. You have every right to privacy, Rachel said. I know, I answered, but I still feel guilty and I hate that. Is that crazy? It's not crazy, she said, pulling me closer. It's human. They trained you to feel responsible for their emotions, to shrink yourself so they could feel bigger. And guilt is the leash they use to keep you close. That hit hard because Rachel had done her own therapy long before we met, working through the damage from a demanding, critical father, and she recognized the patterns in my family because she'd lived them herself. When I started seeing Dr. Reeves 2 years into our relationship, Rachel had supported me completely. My therapist is going to have a field day with this, I muttered. I've been seeing Dr. Reeves for 2 years, untangling that constant push and pull of wanting my family's approval while knowing it always came with impossible strings attached. And she'd been encouraging boundaries, though I doubt she imagined I'd set them off like a grenade. We stayed on the couch for hours talking everything through. Rachel asking thoughtful questions, never trying to fix it or tell me what to do. Just listening, validating, and reminding me I wasn't imagining the hurt. What happens now? I finally asked. Whatever you want, she said. This is your story now, not theirs. That idea felt unfamiliar and electric and terrifying all at once. The next morning I woke up to 17 missed calls and 32 text messages, and my stomach sank as I scrolled. Mom had left 6 voicemails, which I listened to while making coffee, Rachel hovering nearby like a calm anchor. The first message was furious, demanding I call her back immediately and accusing me of humiliating her in front of the family. The second was tearful, asking how I could get married without her, insisting she had a right to be there. The third turned accusatory, calling me selfish and saying I'd always thought I was better than everyone else. The fourth tried bargaining, suggesting we could still have a proper reception and celebrate correctly. The fifth snapped back to rage, listing everything she'd done for me, and accusing me of sneaking around to make her look stupid. The sixth sounded defeated, wondering aloud what she'd done to make me hate her and insisting she'd tried her best. Each message landed like a punch, not because she was right, but because she was cycling through every manipulation tactic I'd grown up with, and part of me still wanted to cave to apologize to make it all calm again. "Don't respond yet," Rachel said, watching my face. "Give yourself time." "She's my mother," I said weakly. "And you're allowed to breathe before engaging with her," she replied. The texts were even uglier. Ethan sent a string that went from disbelief to anger to outright cruelty, questioning whether I'd really gotten married or just made it up for attention, accusing me of making Mom cry, saying I always had to make everything about myself, blaming me for ruining Thanksgiving and telling me Brad thought I was toxic. Aunt Linda texted to say Mom was devastated and that family was supposed to support each other, not tear each other down. My cousin Rachel, Ethan's age and just as conventional, wrote a short, cutting message calling me desperate for attention. But there were other messages too. Dad texted late that night saying he didn't blame me, that he and Mom were going to talk, apologizing for not protecting me better, and telling me he loved me, which made me cry into my coffee. Grandma texted early the next morning to congratulate me and say she'd love to meet my wife when I was ready, no pressure, just love. And surprisingly, my cousin Derek chimed in to say it was the most baddest thing he'd ever seen and that Ethan had been unbearable about the house for months. I showed Rachel everything, and she read it all carefully, her expression darkening. "This is abuse," she said quietly. "This isn't normal family conflict. It's punishment for refusing to play your assigned role." I spent the weekend drifting between justified anger and crushing guilt, and Rachel kept me steady, reminding me to eat, to sleep, to stop doom scrolling. We watched movies, took long walks through our neighborhood, crunching over November leaves scattered on brick streets, and she never pushed me to decide anything or respond to anyone. She just stayed close. On Sunday night, I finally called Dr. Reeves, and she squeezed me in for an emergency appointment Monday morning. "Tell me what happened," she said, settling into her chair with her notebook, and I told her everything while she listened, nodding occasionally, letting me finally say it all out loud. When I finished, she asked how I felt about what I'd done, and I told her honestly that it felt like I'd finally said the truth out loud and everyone got angry at me for it. She asked whether they were angry about the truth itself or angry because they'd lost control of the story, and I sat with that for a moment before realizing they were mad I didn't ask permission. Permission to what, exactly? To be happy, to get married, to buy a house, to succeed without needing their stamp of approval first. The words started spilling out faster as I said they were upset because I didn't give them the chance to approve or disapprove, to somehow make my life about them again. "And what does that tell you?" she asked. "That they never really cared about my happiness," I said, "only about their ability to shape it." Dr. Reeves smiled gently and told me that was a meaningful insight. We spent the rest of the session talking through boundaries, and she helped me draft responses that were honest without being cruel and firm without turning aggressive, reminding me that I could love people and still protect myself. "You're not responsible for managing their emotions," she said as we wrapped up, "only for being truthful and respectful, and how they respond is on them." I left her office feeling steadier, clearer, and more ready for whatever came next. That night I finally texted my dad back and told him I'd love for him to meet Rachel and see the house, suggesting next Saturday, and he replied almost immediately saying that sounded wonderful and asking if he should bring anything. "Just yourself," I wrote back. I still wasn't ready to deal with my mom, so instead of calling her back I sent a short text saying I needed space and would reach out when I was ready, that I loved her but needed time. She didn't reply, and somehow that silence hurt worse than another angry message would have. I ignored Ethan's text completely, because he was acting like a grown man throwing a tantrum over not being the center of attention, and I wasn't going to play into that. I texted my grandmother to thank her for her kindness and told her I'd call soon so we could plan a visit. Going back to work on Monday felt like a relief, and I buried myself in blueprints and meetings, grateful for problems that actually had solutions. At lunch my coworker Sarah noticed I seemed distracted and asked if I was okay, and even though I'd always kept my work life and family life separate, I was tired of hiding, so I told her I'd dropped the news at Thanksgiving that I'd gotten married 6 months earlier and my family hadn't known. Her eyes went wide as she asked why, and I told her the truth, that my family had spent my whole life making me feel like nothing I did was good enough, and I didn't want them poisoning my wedding day. She leaned back and asked how they reacted, and I said about how you'd expect with anger, guilt trips and accusations, the usual dysfunction. She surprised me by saying she was sorry I was dealing with that, but also that I should be proud of myself because it took guts, then admitted her own family wasn't that different and sometimes you have to save yourself from the people who are supposed to protect you. That conversation helped more than she probably realized, because it reminded me I wasn't alone. Saturday came quicker than I expected, and Rachel and I spent Friday night cleaning a house that was already clean, rearranging furniture and debating wine glasses out of pure nervous energy, until she laughed and reminded me that my dad wasn't a hostile diplomat. I knew it mattered, though, that he see our life and understand why I'd made the choices I had, and she reassured me that he would. Dad showed up right at noon with a bottle of wine and a wooden cutting board he'd made himself, his expression cautious when I opened the door like he wasn't sure he was welcome, and I hugged him hard and told him to come in. Rachel stepped forward and introduced herself, and my dad shook her hand before surprising her with a hug and thanking her for making me happy, saying he could see it on my face. We walked him through the house room by room, explaining what we'd done, and he ran his hands over the exposed brick, studied the crown molding, and admired how we'd kept the history while making it livable. In the kitchen he asked if we'd really done all that work ourselves, and when Rachel explained what we'd hired out and what we'd handled, he got quiet and told me this was exactly the kind of house I used to draw as a kid, Victorian places with turrets and stained glass, fairy tale stuff I'd forgotten all about but realized he was right. We ate lunch with sunlight pouring through the bay windows, and he asked Rachel about her work, her family, and how we met, listening with real interest instead of half attention. And after we finished he told me he owed me an apology for letting my mom's favoritism go on as long as it had, for convincing himself it wasn't that bad and that I was strong enough to handle it. I tried to stop him but he looked me straight in the eye and said he needed to say it, that I was his son and he should have stood up for me more and made sure I knew he was proud of me even when my mom was too focused on Ethan to notice. I failed you and I'm sorry, my dad said, and my eyes burned instantly because I honestly never believed he really saw it. I did see it, he continued, his voice low. I just didn't know how to fix it without blowing everything up. Your mother and Ethan have a bond one never fully understood, and I kept hoping she'd eventually see you the way I do, but she was too wrapped up in her own expectations. Rachel quietly excused herself to give us space, carrying the dishes into the kitchen. I'm proud of you, my dad said, looking straight at me. Not just for the house or the marriage or your career, but for having the guts to build the life you actually wanted instead of the one we expected. That kind of strength doesn't get enough credit. I never wanted to hurt anyone, I said. I know, he replied, but growth hurts sometimes and boundaries hurt too, and that doesn't make them wrong. He reached across the table and squeezed my hand. Your mother will come around eventually. She's stubborn, not stupid. She'll realize what she's losing if she doesn't change, and if she doesn't, you'll still have the life you built, and that has to be enough. We moved into the living room where Rachel joined us again with coffee, and the conversation drifted to lighter things like sports, books, and the neighborhood. My dad fit into our home easily, laughing at Rachel's jokes and asking thoughtful questions about our renovation plans. When he left that night, he hugged me tight and told me not to shut him out, admitting he didn't deserve full access after being complicit for so long, but that he wanted to do better. I told him we could try. I watched him drive away with Rachel's arm around my shoulders, and she said it went well. Really did. One relationship repaired, several still broken, but it was a start. Over the next few days my phone turned into a war zone, with my mom's voicemail swinging between anger and tears, Ethan's texts calling me selfish and attention-hungry, and Aunt Linda somehow finding my email to lecture me about family loyalty. But mixed in with that were other messages too. My dad sent photos from his workshop asking if Rachel wanted to help him build a bookshelf. My grandmother called to say she understood more than I realized and asked for our address so she could mail us a wedding gift. My cousin Derek, who I barely knew, messaged me to say he'd always felt like a black sheep too, and that I'd done the right thing. Rachel's family invited us to dinner, and her mom Patricia hugged me extra tight and admitted my dad had called her to ask about the wedding, saying he wanted to understand what he'd missed. She told me to give people time, not everyone deserves it, but some can grow if you let them. 3 weeks after Thanksgiving, my mom showed up at our door. Rachel quietly told me she'd be in the kitchen if I needed her. I opened the door before my mom could knock, and we stood there staring at each other. Can I come in? She asked. I stepped aside and she walked into the entryway, taking in the exposed brick, the vintage light fixtures, and the stained glass window glowing in the afternoon sun. It's beautiful, she said. Thank you. She twisted the strap of her purse and admitted she wasn't good at apologizing or at admitting when she was wrong, and I stayed quiet, letting her talk. She said she'd compared me to Ethan because his life made sense to her, because it felt safe and familiar, and that my creativity and certainty about my own path scared her. She sat down on the stairs and suddenly looked older than I remembered, confessing she thought pushing me toward conventional success would protect me. She looked up at me with real regret in her eyes and told me my dad had pointed out how often I tried to share my life with them, only for them to steer the conversation back to Ethan. And after thinking about it, she realized he was right. I sat beside her and told her I'd stop sharing because every time I did, she found something wrong with it. She broke down and apologized, saying I deserved a mother who celebrated who I actually was, not who she wanted me to be. We sat quietly for a while, and I could hear Rachel moving softly in the kitchen, giving us space but staying close. Eventually my mom asked if she could meet Rachel, see the rest of the house and really listen this time. I said okay, knowing it wasn't forgiveness yet, but it was something, a crack in the wall. Rachel came out with coffee and the lemon cookies she'd baked, introduced herself, and my mom laughed, a real laugh, admitting she probably deserved everything I'd ever said about her. We gave her a full tour, and when I showed her the third-floor studio where I worked and Rachel kept her engineering models, she asked real questions, not disguised judgments about my work, the neighborhood, and our plans. When she left 2 hours later, she hugged me longer than usual and said she wanted to do better. Not promising perfection, just effort. And I told her that was all I was asking for. Christmas was still awkward and Ethan barely spoke to me, clearly upset that I'd taken attention away from his new house, but things had shifted and for the first time that felt like enough. But my dad helped Rachel install new shelving in the basement, and my mom complimented my outfit without adding that it would look better if I dressed more like Ethan, which felt like progress, even if it was small. The real change came in March, 8 months after that Thanksgiving blow-up, when Ethan showed up at our house alone on a Saturday morning, and I almost didn't answer the door. I was a jerk, he said the second I opened it, not just at Thanksgiving but for years before that, and I'm sorry. I was so stunned I forgot to invite him inside, and we stood there in the doorway while he went on, his eyes red but steady. Tyler and I have been going to couples counseling, he said, and things aren't great, and our therapist asked us to look at patterns we learned growing up. I realized I've been competing with you our entire lives because Mom turned everything into a contest. He wiped his eyes with the back of his hand and took a breath. You were braver than me. You built a life you actually wanted instead of performing for everyone else, and I resented you for that, Mark. Hearing him say my name like that hit differently. I'm not asking you to forgive me right away, he added, forcing a weak, sad laugh. I just wanted you to know I'm working on it, on not being such a narcissist. Then he asked if he could actually see the house, really see it, not judge it, and I nodded. I walked my brother through my home, my life, the world I'd built without his approval. And when he saw the studio and my drawings spread across the drafting table, he started crying. You're incredibly talented, he whispered, and I realized he'd never said that to me before. No, you hadn't, I told him, and he nodded and said he was saying it now. Things didn't suddenly become perfect after that. My mom still slipped into comparisons sometimes before catching herself, and Ethan and I had to relearn how to be siblings without our mother's expectations hanging between us. Family dinners stayed a little tense, everyone careful around old scars. But Rachel and I hosted Thanksgiving the next year in our house on our terms. My dad and Rachel cooked the turkey together, arguing playfully about brining. My mom brought flowers and complimented the table without suggesting improvements, and Ethan showed up with Tyler and calmly announced they were separating, and instead of making it a spectacle, we just supported him. My grandmother pulled me aside in the kitchen while I was mashing potatoes and told me I'd done the right thing, patting my cheek and saying sometimes people need to be shocked into seeing what they've been missing, and that my mom needed that. I told her I hadn't done it to shock anyone, I'd done it because I was exhausted, and she smiled and said that was exactly why it mattered. Later that night, after everyone left and Rachel and I were cleaning up, she asked if I regretted how I'd handled things the year before. I thought about it while washing wine glasses, watching the bubbles shimmer under the kitchen light, and finally said no because I'd spent too many years trying to be enough for people who had already decided I wasn't, and I wasn't doing that anymore. She kissed my temple and we finished the dishes in easy silence, and I thought about the younger version of myself who'd sat at that Thanksgiving table feeling small and wrong, wishing I could tell him that one day he'd have this, a home he loved, a partner who celebrated him, family members learning how to do better, and most of all peace with his own choices. The truth is, I didn't settle down the way my mom meant, because I didn't conform or compromise or shrink myself to fit someone else's idea of success. I built something real, something mine, something worth protecting from people who couldn't see its value. And when they finally stared in shock, when my mom's face went red and the table fell silent, I wasn't performing or proving anything. I was just done pretending their doubt mattered more than my joy. That was the real settling down, the moment I chose myself over their approval, and everything good that followed grew out of that single decision to stop apologizing for my happiness. My phone buzzed with a text from my dad thanking us for hosting and saying the house was beautiful and that I was beautiful too, and I showed Rachel and she smiled and said people can change, and I told her some people can, the ones willing to do the work. We turned off the lights and headed upstairs, passing the framed courthouse wedding photo in the hallway, that version of me smiling out with a quiet joy I'd protected until I was ready to share it, and I smiled back at myself and the choice I'd made. Some people think revenge is about hurting others the way they hurt you, but mine was quieter, building a good life and refusing to let anyone diminish it, choosing people who loved me as I was instead of who they wanted me to be, and calmly stating that I'd already achieved everything I'd been accused of failing at, just without permission or approval. The best revenge was my happiness, fully lived and unapologetic, and I wasn't giving that up for anyone.